So thanks for attending. I'm Mike Cloutier. I'm the moderator for the session. This is Youth Exchange Counselor Training, the first session. Thanks for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to your trainer for today, Dan Wheaton. Dan is our rebound coordinator for Rotary Youth Exchange, past president of the Rotary Club of Paulsbo North Kitsap. He is now the rebound coordinator, so he coordinates rebound activity for all our students who are coming back from exchange. Take it away, Dan.
All right, Mike, thanks. You know, and I guess just as another form of background, I've been in Rotary since 1994. 1993, excuse me, since 1993. And our first exchange student, my wife and I's first exchange student, a young man from Argentina who today is like 43 years old, which kind of freaks me out a little bit, was in 1994. And so my wife and I have hosted 9 students. I've been a YEO counselor, I've been a YEO, and now I'm rebound coordinator. I'm very invested in this program. I think so much about it. And I know all of you who are here are taking it because this is a training. This might not have been your first choice among all of the other options you had, but because you're in a training, you're either currently a counselor, you're going to be a counselor, or you're in a position that you need to be picking a counselor for your club. And so Mike and I want to thank you for being here. We're going to try to make this as fun and educational as possible. And with that, and by the way, we're going to try to be a little bit interactive. I'm going to be asking some questions. You can't just be sitting back doing nothing on this one. We're going to be asking you some questions. And when I do, I'll have you raise your hand. Mike will pick on some of the luckiest of you to answer. And then we'll keep moving on. By the way, I don't know if Mike, I don't think he mentioned this. This is part one of 2. So hopefully you've signed up for both of them. This is part 1 of part 2 of youth counselor training. All right, here we go. So here's the big picture. And this big picture has become a little bit more clouded. And we're going to talk a little bit about that during this training. While clouds can be pretty, the challenge of COVID-19 in the youth exchange program, frankly, has reared its ugly head and has made it more a challenge than ever before. If you can imagine, and many of you probably have been or are currently counselors in your program, what's happened just in this past year? Heck, what's happened just in the past 2 months with everything that's erupted globally with youth exchange and having kids that are outbound that had to come home early and having kids that are inbound going back early. It's made a dent in this year from a certain perspective of what we were trying to accomplish. It's made your job as a counselor more challenging. And as we look forward into the big picture of the future, you know, I don't know that today on May 16th, we have a real firm idea of what next year's youth exchange program's what's gonna happen with it. And really, frankly, because we start the process of looking for recruiting for the following year, this COVID-19 has created a little bit of a challenge for all of us involved with youth exchange. And the reason I bring this up right now is because you as a counselor, you're the front line. You know, the youth exchange officers are kind of dealing with all the admin things. You are in the front line. You're the one dealing currently with either a student that is outbound or has had to come back early. You're dealing with a student that was inbound and is either still here. In Paulsbo, both of our students are still here and has had to be quarantined and all of that, or they've had to go home. So my message to you from a big picture perspective is this. Youth exchange is still an incredibly vital and crucial program in Rotary around the world, Rotary International. It's critical, and I believe it still is for our district and for our clubs. And I think our job has gotten a little bit harder, which makes this training even more important. And so as we go through some of the things that we need to discuss, I want you to kind of keep track of that big picture, because moving forward, we've got to have this whole pandemic in our minds, because how we interact with these students, whether we're sending them abroad or whether they're coming back, that's going to be important. So here's the Rotary International Statement of Conduct for Working with Youth. I'm going to read it. I promise I'm going to do my very best not to read to you today, other than this, because I think it's important. Rotary International strives to maintain a safe environment for all youth who participate in Rotary activities. To the best of their ability, Rotarian spouses and partners and volunteers must safeguard the children and young people they come into contact with and protect them from physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. So here are some key words that we as counselors, we are those working with youth, I think we need to remember out of this whole message. Number one is we have youth that participate in Rotary activities. And I know we as a district do a tremendous job of getting kids active and participating in our club activities and in our district activities. We as a community must safeguard, because the reality is this is somebody else's child that we are bringing in, and it's somebody else's child that we're sending out. And for all of us who are parents and grandparents, if we think about those kids in that regard, who would we want? Would we want Rotarians safeguarding our kids and our grandkids who have gone abroad, or in all those cases? So I think this is a really important statement and really the foundation of what we're doing. And Mike, I know that you're very active in both youth exchange and youth protection. Is there anything before I move on that you want to talk about regarding this statement?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
It does affect all other Rotary youth programs. It's not just for youth exchange. Right. As youth exchange counselors, you have a very, very unique role, and Dan is going to be getting involved or getting into that very, very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. The Rotarian counselor is the primary advocate for the student, the primary advocate. And you can tell I like using bold whenever I think something is really important. That Rotarian counselor serves as the liaison. And as you notice, it's not just the liaison for the student, it's the Rotary Club, the host family, and the community at large. The Rotarian counselor, I kind of think of in this way. If any of you are football fans, the head coach of any football team is the one that really administers and runs and guides the entirety of the program. So if you think of a youth exchange officer, that's what they're doing. They're dealing with all the administrative work regarding that youth program. I see the counselors very much as like the offensive and defensive coordinator. They're the ones dealing every single play with someone. So if you are the offensive coordinator for Russell Wilson, you're dealing with him on a much more constant basis than the head coach is. That's, I think, the relationship that the counselor has. That counselor is going to be and should be, and you're going to hear me reiterate this over and over. You as a counselor have to be that first point of contact. So that exchange student, and we're going to talk about both inbound and outbound counselors, that exchange student thinks of you first and foremost. The counselor serves as that student's primary contact, easing his or her transition into the country and the community through regular contact. So here's my question for you, and you can go ahead and raise hands, and Mike's going to be in charge of this, and we'll talk to a few people about this question. What are examples that you can think of that exemplify what being an advocate is? We'll go ahead and take any raised hands, Mike. What are some examples that you can think of that you can say, hey, this is being an advocate for an inbound or an outbound student?
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
My
Andy.
personal opinion, being an advocate is really that person who is the confidant, the one that the youth can go to and say, you know, I'm loving this, I'm having a great time, but I have some concerns, and then it's our job as the advocate to step up and say, we recognize those concerns, and going forward, here's what we can do. It's being that middle person.
And I love the word confidant. In fact, I think I might even like it better than advocate, because confidant has the word confident in it, right?
Exactly.
Right. And that means that if I'm a student, I've got to be confident in that counselor and trust that counselor. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Who's
Okay,
next?
Jeffrey, you're up.
Yeah, I guess I'm unmuted.
You are.
I think one of the things you need to do is make sure that their members of your club actively participate with the student. For example, one time we had a student, and we had a book of a calendar type book that passed around, and guys would sign up for activities to do with the exchange student, different, take them to a ball game, whatever. So otherwise, people just kind of think it's going to happen, but it doesn't happen without you're actually, taking an active part.
So Jeffrey, what I'm hearing you say is, as it says here, the Rotarian counselor serves as liaison between the club. You're also actively recruiting activities so that everybody gets engaged with that student and gets them assimilated very quickly. Thank you. Mike, anybody else?
Eric Quinn.
Yeah, I've been a youth counselor before, and I think another role of the youth counselor is to, at times, tell the student what they don't want to hear and keep them adhering to the rules. In this day of social media and instant communication, we had a student who was constantly on his cell phone, constantly reaching out to his parents at home, and he had to have his cell phone taken away. The youth counselor has to be willing to put their foot down, and I think that is another big part and a difficult part of being a youth counselor.
Thanks for saying that. And we're obviously, as you can imagine, we're going to touch on that whole concept later on. But I think what I hear from you that I really like is that, yeah, we can be a confidant, we can be an advocate, but sometimes in that front line, like maybe the offensive coordinator saying, hey, Russ, you can't do that anymore. That's no good for the team. You have to be able to say, hey, this is no good for our team. And you have to be able to do that. I think we have time for one more I want to make sure we stay on track. So Mike,
Right.
Is there any more?
There was a comment from Andy that counselors should be role models for the students.
Oh, good. Role model. Thank you very much. And I know everybody here is a tremendous role model. So thank you. So quick pardon the interruption. This is not my dog, Captain Jack, although you'll see him later on. I'm a Jack Russell minion, so I like having some Jack Russells in here. The counselor cannot be a family member, close friend, relative of volunteers involved with the student in a position of authority over the student, and may not be a club or district youth exchange chair. Nope, can't happen. So what we really try to do is say, hey, that counselor, yes, they're a confidant, yes, they're an advocate, but they can't also be hosting the student. They can't also be the district youth exchange chair, because that's a different relationship there. Their job first and foremost is to be an advocate for that student. And that requires a separation where some of these don't come into play. By the way, some of you have been around in Rotary Youth Exchange for a while. This wasn't always the case. This was not always the case. I've been in Rotary, like I said, 27 years almost. And I know in youth exchange, there's been times where the youth exchange officer was also a host family, or the host family. So this is an important part of it, and it's a fairly new over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I think. So the inbound counselor. The inbound counselor has some roles and responsibilities. And you might be saying, well, wait, Dan, wait a second. The inbound counselor, what do you mean? Well, we're going to talk about both the inbound and the outbound counselor. This is something that, again, is fairly recent, may not be as well known. But what we require, when we and I say Rotary requires, is that there is an inbound and an outbound counselor. So I'm going to talk about both. The one thing I will tell you is it can be the same person. It can be the same person. And in our club in Paulsbo, the same two counselors we have, the male counselor and the female counselor, they act as both the inbound and the outbound counselor. So it's not like you have to go find 4 people. But for the inbound counselor, this is a picture of one of my exchange students who was celebrating her birthday party at one of our, actually that was a youth exchange author at the time, Craig Adams, Tati from Columbia. Roles and responsibilities: establishing contact with the student before departure. And here's some important part: explaining expectations and documenting regular contact. Counseling students in matters such as choosing classes, making friends, and participating in activities. COVID-19, as we start talking about that, heck, we don't even know if school's going to start on time. We don't even know what school's going to look like yet at this point. And so how things develop over the next year, this can be a very important role as we might be working with a short time frame. Helping the student to adapt to the culture and the language. Let me just say this about language. As the rebound coordinator, I get to work with the outbound orientation and all of that. And one of the things we continually tell the students, because we've heard it from the kids that have come back, is that language is really important. So whatever the inbound counselor can do before the student arrives to help them to understand, to make sure and see where their language skills are, it's important. By the way, we've had some kids from Europe whose language was better than some of the kids we had here. So sometimes it's not as important, but it usually is. Working with the community and the student school to ensure that the student is involved in positive activities in community life. Look, there's situations where sometimes students will come, and very much, I think, like what Eric said, they will be on their phone. They'll be back talking to people at home. They won't be involved in activities in the community life, and that's an important part of it. Reinforcing youth protection, abuse and harassment prevention to support for a supportive atmosphere. And then back again, serving that as an advocate for students. Your turn. And this is kind of a rapid fire, so raise your hand. Rapid fire, and your turn in less than about 7 words. What's the most important role of the inbound counselor? Inbound counselor. Mike, we're going to do a rapid fire here.
Kalia?
Hi, Keely. So I think they should, like, a inbound counselor should be like patient and understanding of situations, and being able to get the student involved in like a nice, hopefully easy flow into the community they're in.
Thank you. Kevin.
I was going to say just working to prepare the student for the entire experience before they get hurt.
Preparing the student for the entire experience. Great. Thank you. Who's next?
Eric?
I'd say the role of the inbound counselor is to listen and respond.
Listen and respond. Thank you. Very good. Well, anybody else have their hands up? Mike?
Dennis?
Dennis.
I think it's important that there are a coordinator between the host family, the schools, and the student themselves.
Coordinator between the host family, the school, and themselves. Thank you. And so I do want to talk about the outbound counselor. Somebody sent me a note that it's been more than 10 years. I got to tell you, I've been in Rotary for a long time. I was part of Youth Exchange, and it was a best kept secret, perhaps. Maybe that's a. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, I don't know that it was the best kept secret. It was the secret that nobody wanted to recognize. It was the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget, and we've now known, I've known about it now for about 3 years, but I remember being in a training and the outbound counselor comment came up, and it was like, I didn't know about it. And there was other people there who had long time been. And so I think what's happened is that we have certainly as a district made it more of an emphasis than it has been before. Mike, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, let me push forward. So the outbound counselor has a key role, and the key role is that verifying that exchanges that are administered within compliance with RI policy. So let me, I feel like I've got a lot more knowledge about this as I've been taking on the responsibility of being a rebound coordinator. And the reason I say that is I've had an opportunity to talk to kids who have come back. Believe it or not, the kids we send away don't all have the same experience that some of the kids we have coming in are. And so the ability to stay in regular communication with those students, because, you know, I hate to say it, sometimes things aren't in compliance with RI policy in other places. And we as a district need to know that, not only for ourselves, but for our kids. You can talk to students about the relationship with their host families, determine whether they've attended the required inbound orientation, and then simply talk to them about how they're acclimating. We found out, one of the kids that we'd sent out last year didn't have an inbound orientation. That was a little bit odd. We certainly always do here, but that wasn't the case. So making sure that we're in contact with them so they don't feel alone out there, that's really important. Students generally feel most comfortable communicating with their sending district, that's us, about problems they may have, especially early in the exchange. We know this from those of us who have worked with inbound students, that the hardest part of the exchange is about the first 60 days-ish or so. And we've heard this from our outbound exchange kids, that there's a period of time there where there's an immediate, wow, cool, I'm here. And then all of a sudden reality starts setting in and they realize that their language isn't quite up to snuff with conversationally as they thought, that school is really way different, that they don't have a car to drive anywhere, that they've got to walk or ride a bike, and that friends are harder to make. And so that outbound counselor can help respond to problems or concerns right away. And I really, truly believe that this part of the role of that outbound counselor, the early part of it, and I know Rob in our club has done a great job with our outbound of being active with them before they left. So he developed that rapport. Lori, the same way, but actually for both of them, developed that rapport early on so that when the kids are gone and in that first week or two, be able to stay in touch. And if this training, I know it's been around 10 years, but if this training does at least one thing, and that's put an emphasis on outbound counselors, whether it's the same or not, person or not, I think that we've walked away with a win here. Mike, I really would like to bring you in here and just talk a little bit more about that conversation.
Sure. I mean, we just heard from Hans and his club. They have separate inbound and outbound counselors. Jeffrey is the SQUIM outbound counselor. We do absolutely require that clubs have inbound and outbound counselors. On the inbound side, it's a little bit easier to control because we won't issue a DS 2019 to allow the student to get their visa unless we actually have the inbound counselor. We'll do something similar to that this year, and that the student doesn't go on exchange until we have an outbound counselor. One of the other things that Dan mentioned that the outbound counselor really needs to do is to establish rapport with the student early on. And the best way that you can do that is when you, as a club, select an outbound candidate, somebody that you're going to have go through and finish their application. Have the counselor work with the student to complete their application. Have them go over all of the documents that the student's putting in that application package to start developing that rapport. Have your outbound counselors come to the district interviews. Have them come to the outbound orientation so that they can further bond with the students before they actually depart.
You know, and Mike, Jeannie had a comment. We just this year made it more of a focus. I'm not sure which club she is, but she mentioned had a couple kids return early, and this has helped. I think that is a great comment, because what we know about kids returning early is that they've had some challenges early on for whatever reason. It could be host families, be a lot of different things. And if we have an idea of what's going on because we're communicating with them, we can help with that. That outbound counselor is really important in that area. So Mike, thank you.
Having those outbound counselors working with the students on the application, you might have some red flags come up that indicate that, hey, maybe this kid is not mature enough or does not have the right skill set, the right toolbox to be able to deal with being on exchange. If you can identify that before they go through the district interviews, or even after the district interviews and before they go on exchange, you're going to save the student a lot of grief and their parents a bunch of money.
Very good. And that's both are good things, right?
Definitely.
That's right. That's great. All right, some expectations here. That's I only have pictures of kids from my club, though, so I apologize for that. But those are the pictures I have. Sydney Engelbertink was one of ours, and that's with one of our club members, Kimmy. The counselor must be able to encourage the student during challenging times to facilitate his or her involvement in school, club, and community life. By the way, we're talking about both inbound and outbound right now. We've kind of transitioned back to talking about just the role of the counselor. Encourage students during challenging times. One of the reasons I have Sydney here is Sydney is a great student for us. She had some challenging times here that were none of her doing. And we were fortunate to have really strong counselors and really a full team at this time. When she was here, her first host family mother passed away unexpectedly, tragically, in the last week of her time with that family. One of the most, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it right now because it was a very challenging time. It was spouse of one of our Rotarians, and she passed away right in the midst of the move. So we actually had to move her about a week early. And then later on, during her second time there, her grandmother back in the Netherlands passed away. So if you can imagine challenging times don't always mean something that the student has done. There's things outside of their control, and you'll see that all the time. That counselor was so incredibly valuable for our club because she was able to help Sydney, as were the host families, by the way. So it was a team effort, but it was so incredibly valuable for us because there are challenging times, whether it's school, community life, or just personal things that happen. Counselors are very important. And Sydney was able not only to get through those well, but she finished out her year really fantastically. And actually, she's come back to visit us. If a problem should arise, students should feel comfortable. That was the confidant part. The counselor should identify as the same gender as the student when possible. I think that helps in the ability to be a confidant. Counselors should be willing and able to devote more time and energy to the exchange than is required of other host club members. Obviously, our host clubs have a number of people in there who are willing to help and want to take kids on trips and take them out to dinner and all of that. This counselor role means that you're much more one-on-one. You may be having a conversation every week at meetings, just, hey, how's it going? Even though we say the minimum is monthly, I can tell you that the best counselors I've seen are keeping track with them at least on an every other week basis. Normally at the club meeting, having at least a quick talk, it's that constant and that consistency that becomes important. So I have a question because again, I've been doing this a long time in the youth exchange part. And in the old days, the YEO was the one who seemed to act as both the YEO and the counselor. That was common. So the question, everybody, raise your hand and we'll take you in, just kind of like we're doing radio. Why the counselor rather than the YEO? Why have we chosen to make the counselor the front line in this rather than the youth exchange officer? And Mike, I'll take take anybody who wants to come from anywhere in the world with us here.
So I got to be honest, I kind of just was put into the youth exchange or the youth officer chair role in my club. But I'm going to take a gander and say that the YEO is kind of, if there's multiple exchanges within your club, you're kind of in charge of, monitoring everything that's happening, making sure it's all going on. Whereas the counselor has the opportunity to focus directly on the specific student they are quote unquote assigned to, lack of a better term.
Andy, I can see why you're now in this position with your club. What club are you with?
Twin Cities Rotary Club.
And where is that?
Well, we are kind of in between Centralia and Chehalis.
Okay. Not Minneapolis and St. Paul, right? No, okay, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. No, that's a great answer, Andy. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, Pete Carroll is in charge of the entire team. The offensive and defensive coordinators are with those players, and so there's so much administrative work with the Y. That's a great answer. Eric, I think, is next.
Well, this is my first go around as youth exchange officer as well, and I agree with Andy. And the only thing that I would add is, I'll hazard a guess and say that the role of the youth exchange officer is to interface with the district and pay attention to the district-wide implications of what's going on. And the role of the counselor is, like Andy said, just the student. Pay attention to the student.
Rosemary.
When I was the counselor, I'm now the YEO, about to retire, but when I was the counselor, my student came to me with a complaint about the YEO. The YEO had made a decision that she disagreed with. She had asked for permission to do something that Maureen was then the YEO, and she had said no. And the student had someone else to go to and talk about it. And I was able to explain to her, and I was able to go to Maureen and ask her, why did you make this decision, and what is there about it that I don't know? And then I was able to be that buffer between the YEO and the student. But the student had someone to go to when they don't want to complain about the boss.
Right.
They have someone who's their advocate to go to.
Rosemary, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's true. And it seems odd in a lot of ways. The YEO has to, in a sense, take a role of the parent sometimes when it's, am I allowed to go somewhere, or can I do something? And it may cause frustration, even if the YEO did the right thing for whatever reason. Kids don't always see it that way. But if they have that confidence to go to you and say, hey, this is really bothering me, I think that's a really important place to go. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. Mike, do we have anybody else?
Jeffrey's up.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, hi. I'm new to the counselor job. I have been a Rotary dad 3 times, and I think as a Rotarian and a host, you almost are a counselor. And my first student was Antonio from Argentina, and he was really interested in aviation. I was a pilot in the Coast Guard, so we really mixed, but he had an opportunity to get flight training for free while he was here. And, the youth exchange had to tell him, no, you can't, drive or fly or whatever. And of course, I was trying to be an advocate for my students, and I know now I was wrong, but you have to. I think the counselor has to be aware of what's possible and not, even though he wants to try and give his student what he'd like to do, but you can't do that all the time. So, long story short, this guy is now a first pilot with JetBlue. Worked out.
Good. Well, Jeffrey, thank you. Well, I'll mention this, and this is from a personal perspective. I was a counselor for several years, I think 3 years, before I took over as YEO of our club. And one of my learning curves in transitioning from counselor to YEO is I took on the counselor role that I really liked. I liked being the counselor. I realized that the YEO had a lot of admin work. But what I found out was I was burning myself. It was a ton of work. It was really hard, kind of as what Andy said in the beginning. It was really hard to oversee the entire process and then also try to keep up with what the counselor should have been doing. I wasn't leaning on my counselors enough that first year. That changed. That changed after that. And so if you're a YEO out there and you're maybe a new YEO, I encourage you, use your counselors, train them, educate them, have them involved in as much information as possible about the whole process, because the more that you can get them involved, and I guess I would go back to the inbounds and the outbounds process, get them involved well before the kid comes in. So as soon as we found out, every year when we'd find out what kids we were going to host, we did a quick introduction. And I did this as a YEO. Here's your counselor. Please, counselor and kid, reach out to each other. Talk on Zoom or on FaceTime or on Skype or whatever it is. Get to know each other. Similarly, with the outbound, have them come sit with them during our meetings. Have them coming and getting to know you. And so I think, again, as a YEO who spent too much time counseling that first year, please get those counselors involved.
So Dan, there was one more question that came up.
Oh, sure.
From Kim. Are there ever exceptions for exchange students be able to drive? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is that it's an insurance issue. So the insurance that they have through CISI Bulldog when they come will not cover them if they are driving and they're in an accident. A single exception to that are those whatever these newfangled
the bicycles that are motorized. Is that what you're going to say?
No, it's not a motorized bicycle, but it's real close to it.
Okay.
I'm drawing a blank now on what that device is called, but it's not a moped. Thank you, Jen, but it's not a moped. It's not an electric bike. It's another conveyance that they're allowed to drive, and I'll look it up while.
I promise you, one of our very smart
it's a stand-up thing, Jen.
The stand-up thing.
It's the stand-up thing.
Segway, right?
It's not a Segway.
Darn.
I'll get it. Hang on just a second.
Okay. We'll get it from Mike. We'll keep on moving on. But the reality is once we find that name, that's the only one. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Interestingly enough, and those of you who've been doing this a little bit of time will find the inbound kids.
It's a Lime scooter.
What is it?
The Lime scooter.
The Lime scooter. Okay. So many of these kids coming in are shocked that more of us aren't using bicycles, just the plain old bicycle. It's just funny. So before arrival, I touched on this a little bit before. I guess I probably should have remembered that this was the next slide. This is an interesting picture. This is kind of a cool thing that happened. At the same moment, we had our rebound student to the right there, Jace. He had just come back. Giacomo from Italy on the left, he had just come in. And we had our next exchange student going out who had not left for Croatia yet, Emily there. So for that 1 week, we had the triumvirate. We had rebound student, we had outbound student, and we had inbound student all at the same meeting, which is really kind of cool. So we'll talk about before arrival. Encourage the first host family and the Rotarian counselor to establish communication with the student before they're allowed, to establish that link to critical resources. If possible, the Rotarian counselor should be present when the student arrives. And I know that Rob and Lori, the last several years, I've gone because I just get a kick out of it. And still being part of the district youth exchange, I feel good about. In fact, we have a number of Rotarians who just like to go to be part of it. But I know that Rob and Lori, and in past years, those before them, have always been, if they could make it, they were there. I think it's important that that connection is made. One of the things that a counselor can do to help pre-kid coming is get them hooked up with different internet links, like the local chamber of commerce, the high school or the school district they're going to be attending, so they can look at some of the activities and maybe some of the classes. Your Rotary website. I know that I attended this morning about brand and the importance of the website. So once, after you get that all taken care of, after you've listened to Corey and Katie, send that out to the kids so they can see this is what they're doing. Many of you have Facebook pages for your club. Get them involved on that Facebook page. The more that they can feel at home. I'm going to tell you, as a guy who had a student come in 1994 when we were still using faxes, to try to communicate. The ability before coming in on that inbound, before coming in today, so vitally important, so really, really important. And it's not just for the counselor, but it's also for the first host family. And that's where the counselor can really be that link where we're talking about in that first bullet. If you have a first host family, especially if that first host family has never hosted before, that happens sometimes. The counselor can put everybody at ease by being the facilitator, by brokering that experience. I have to brag. So this is my first group of rebound students. These are all kids. Some of you may recognize a few of them. These are the kids that came back last year. They were at Rebound Weekend last August. And these kids are fantastic. And so I use them as an example. Of, hey, Rotarians in District 5020, this is your best work. These are ambassadors that you sent out, completed their mission, and came back, maybe with a little more attitude than before. I don't know if that's true or not, but these are the kids that came back. And I've learned so much about their experiences, and I really want that outbound counselor. Maybe it's the same as the inbound. But what we found in our club is that our outbound counselors have worked hard to keep that relationship going with those kids that come back. These are the kids we sent out. These are the kids that have come back. And frankly, I hope that all of these kids turn into Rotarians someday. You know, we're working on a Rotex club that kind of got stalled a little bit with COVID-19, unfortunately, but we're working on making sure that the kids that we're sending out, whether they become Rotarians or not, are going to be doing some great things in their life. And we've seen that both of the kids that we're sending out and the kids that are coming back. So providing assistance. The Rotarian counselor should be available to the students at all times to discuss questions or concerns about the host family or the school. So look, I want to touch on this a little bit. This happens. It's a part of the deal. Sometimes the host family and the kid, for whatever reason, it's not a perfect fit. Let me be clear about one thing. It's not a requirement that it's a perfect fit. Now, what we don't want is anything that is obviously not good being a part of it. And that's an important part of being the counselor. But sometimes it's just not a perfect fit. And so part of the whole experience is making sure that the counselor can be there for the student to hear about those concerns. And in some cases, be able to say, here's where the host family is. This is where they are in there. And so that becomes an important part. The other part is school. It's one thing has been incredibly clear to me. Schools in other countries are way different than our schools. we find that the kids coming in usually have gone to much smaller schools. Some of you may have small schools here at North Kitsap High School. We have, I think, something like 11 or 1,200 kids in the school. And for somebody who is coming in that had 120 kids in their school, this is a culture shock. Doesn't even begin, much less they're trying to keep up with the language. So that first week is really important for that inbound counselor. Outbound counselors, the same might be true on the other end. A kid going out may have a completely different experience. We had one rebound student who went to Japan who found that her trek to school seemed like it was like an hour-long trip. You know, it was a completely different situation, and they had a bike there, and it was different. And so making sure that any concerns or questions about host family and school, you're there for. And so this is a great time to take in questions. And I don't care if it's a question on something we haven't touched on yet that we'll touch on later. This is a great time. So as you're thinking of that and raising your hand.
So back to the rebound.
Yes.
I was just wondering if it's equally as important for the counselor to be available for the rebound student, because there's a lot of reverse culture shock of coming back home and you're no longer the same person you were, and that can be a big transition as well, trying to fit back into the mold that everyone expects you to be.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, if I can re-emphasize that, I absolutely will. These kids are changed. A year away, they're changed, and it is tremendously important for that outbound. I wouldn't say they have to be at the airport, because they probably shouldn't be. The family is excited to have them back, but somewhere in that first week, you know, I know that ours invited them back to the club. Now, they may not have come that first week, but they were invited. There was a hey, tell us about your experience. We want to know. And I think just that support, because you've been talking to them for the whole year, is important. And listen, I guess I want to say this to those of you who are currently club counselors, because that's a really important question. Kids who have already come back because of COVID-19, they need your help. Kids
Let me riff off of that, Dan.
Okay.
Those that have come back earlier for other reasons also,
Yes.
they also need your help.
Yes.
Probably even more.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. Yes, that is absolutely true. There's a couple of kids who came back earlier than that. The kids who've come back through no fault of their own too, they need your help. And the kids that are still gone and have maybe had to be hunkered down in some other country. I mean, I'm thinking about our kids that are here from Brazil and from Germany. They've spent a tremendous amount of time with their third host families, really with their third host families. So that coming back is really important. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I want to make sure I get all the.
Next is Andy.
Yeah. So first, thanks for dealing with all my questions. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely.
What I was referencing in the chat was speaking on the YEO side of things. Is there, what our club was trying to do is do the youth protection awareness training at the club level. So in place of a meeting, you know, we do the normal reports and everything, and then we jump into the youth protection awareness training. We review the questions as a team, we go over it together, because then we're covering all bases. With that being said, is there a potential for either in this chat, or you can verbally tell me, I can find it myself, the links to the other trainings that were listed, such as the culture shock and reverse culture shock, that we can go in and take care of?
So Andy, the links to those courses, your club YEO can send them to anybody who is being screened as a youth exchange volunteer. Effective the 1st of July, all of those courses are going to be required to be complete in order for people to access the Youth Exchange Administrative Hub, the YEA Hub system. So we're letting people know now, and in the next week or two, we're going to be sending links out to everybody that hasn't completed the training so that they can get it done.
Okay, and those
Similarly,
links.
there's a course for youth exchange counselors. When you complete this training today, you should be able to just jump right in to that course, go straight down to the quiz, take the quiz, and be done with it.
All right.
And
Thank you very much.
and we have a slide at the very end that will give, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Talk to that.
Love the questions. Thank you. Do we have anybody else, Mike?
We do. We got Robert coming up now.
Robert, you're on live with Dan and Mike. Been waiting to say
Okay, so
that.
here's my question for you, and I think I already know the answer. You just mentioned a couple of seconds ago about the change in our students, and we know that the change is there. I'm wondering if there's a mechanism that we have or can develop that would kind of formalize that evaluation instead of just us saying that's what's happening.
Oh,
So
you
that we
mean
can
like
kind of
doing,
provide some evidence of that?
you mean like doing a survey or a psychological evaluation before they go, and then once again after they're back?
Well, that's an easy way to do it, I suppose. I'm thinking about long-term impact. I believe strongly in this exchange because I do believe that there is an impact, and international education is big in this country. It's huge. It's a huge enterprise. But I've never seen anything that actually documents that there's an impact. And since we have a captured audience in our students, I suppose one of the things that we could do, well, here's the question, can we do it, would be to track them, because there's the short-term evaluation. Hey, did you have a good time and what happened in the past year? And that's when they first get back. But hey, what happened in 5 years, where you can look back and say, wow, that was that impact 5 years ago that really brought me to this position today.
Yeah.
I don't know if it exists, but I'm just questioning, because we are Rotary, if there's some way that we could do that.
So to your question, we do a resilience test. We determine based on a standardized psychological test, the resiliency of our students before they go out on exchange. And then we do that again when they come back from exchange to see how their resiliency, their ability to cope with change has been impacted by being on exchange, because we expect that it will increase significantly. To your question about long-term, it's one of the topics that the North American Youth Exchange Network is looking at right now, is coming up with a standardized way to evaluate that over time. We don't have it yet, but it's something that we're looking at.
So from a qualitative standpoint, Robert, I'll just kind of give you my non-quantifiable one. How about this? We are really, as a district, working on improving the long-term moving forward. And it's changed a lot since I've been in youth exchange. As the rebound coordinator, I'm in charge of when these kids are coming back, and I want to mention something really quick before I forget after that, this coming back, having that rebound weekend, making sure that they're still interacting with the club and the district. In fact, I had 14 kids, 14 rebound kids who were at the district interviews for this year's, to pick those kids. And they were a huge part, Mike would agree with this, of our outbound orientation that was done virtually. We held panels with them. They were actively eager to do that, and they're eager to be part of a ROTEX, which is an alumni group. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep, we've invested in these kids. We want to make sure that they just don't go and then we forget them. So we are working on that. Before I break, it's 2:00. Before I break, one quick thing. Actually, I'll lead off. I'm going to tease you. When you come back, I've got something really cool to ask you. So we're done. It's 2:00. Come back in 15 minutes and you'll hear what I have to say. Great to talk to you all. We'll see you soon.